We need to talk about the absolute legal earthquake that Charles Spencer just triggered inside the highly secured administrative gates of Buckingham Palace. Because if you have been following the royal correspondence this week, or reading the society pages of the British broadsheets, you have undoubtedly seen the heavily promoted, highly polished announcements for Queen Camilla's upcoming project. Her office has been relentlessly publicizing a massive, unprecedented event billed as the Global Crown Humanitarian Gala. The narrative being aggressively pushed by the palace press secretaries is that this event represents a new era of modern, forward-looking royal philanthropy. They are selling the image of a united progressive monarchy, stepping out of the shadows of the past and embracing a bold future. But what the mainstream media has completely missed, and what the royal commentators have willfully ignored, is the highly specific, deeply sinister date that Camilla chose for this massive celebration. The gala was officially scheduled for the 31st of August. That is the exact anniversary of the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. This was not a scheduling coincidence. It was a calculated psychological maneuver designed to completely overwrite the annual memorial news cycle and assert ultimate institutional dominance. But Camilla's public relations team made one catastrophic, irreversible mistake. They forgot that in the dark, chaotic days of 1997, Queen Elizabeth II signed a legally binding, highly classified constitutional agreement with the Spencer family. Charles Spencer did not call a press conference to complain. He did not leak his outrage to the tabloids. He walked straight into the High Court of London, activated his sister's secret pact, and threw the entire palace into a state of total administrative chaos. Before we look at the specific devastating poison pill clause buried inside that 1997 legal covenant, make sure you hit the subscribe button, because the level of historical warfare happening right now is completely unprecedented. To understand the sheer audacity of the event Camilla was attempting to pull off, you have to look at the exorbitant logistical preparations that were already underway behind the walls of Clarence House. This was not going to be a standard, quiet charity dinner. The Global Crown Humanitarian Gala was designed to be the ultimate show of global power. Camilla's executive team had contracted the most expensive event planners in Europe. The guest list was meticulously curated to include American technology billionaires, Hollywood royalty, European heads of state, and the most influential aristocratic families in the United Kingdom. The catering contracts alone ran into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, featuring vintage champagne shipments and bespoke menus designed by Michelin-starred chefs. The internal communication strategy for the event was explicitly designed to dominate the global media landscape. The press releases drafted by Camilla's high-paid consultants were carefully seeded with language about moving past the tragedies of the 20th century and focusing on the bright, unburdened future of the crown. But the true unspoken objective of this massive expenditure of resources was entirely centered on media manipulation. In the modern, fast-paced world of digital journalism, there is only a limited amount of space on the front pages of the global newspapers. Every year, on the 31st of August, the media naturally gravitates toward retrospective documentaries, memorial articles, and public tributes dedicated to Diana. Camilla understood that she could not stop the public from remembering Diana, but she could completely hijack the media cycle if she hosted the most glamorous, high-profile royal event of the decade. On that exact same night, The global press would have no choice but to cover it. The stunning photographs of Camilla wearing state diamonds surrounded by global billionaires would dominate the morning broadcasts. Any mention of Diana's anniversary would be pushed to the back pages, buried under a mountain of carefully manufactured royal glamour. It was a brilliant clinical strategy of visual and temporal erasure. But to understand why the Queen Consort would authorize such a deeply controversial and inherently cruel maneuver, you have to look into the profound psychological insecurities that continue to drive her faction within the palace. Despite having successfully navigated her way to the throne, despite wearing the crown and securing the title, she spent decades maneuvering to obtain Camilla has never been able to escape the towering, inescapable shadow of the woman she replaced. For nearly 30 years, the month of August has been a period of intense anxiety for her office. The public outpouring of grief and the inevitable resurfacing of the late 80s and early 90s scandals serve as an annual global reminder of how her relationship with Charles began. Camilla wanted to use her current apex level of power to finally conquer that date. She wanted to prove to the establishment, to the British public, and most importantly, to herself, that she is the ultimate victor in this historical narrative. She wanted to demonstrate that she possesses the authority to throw a celebration on the very day the world mourns her predecessor. To execute this massive undertaking, Camilla required funding, and this is where the vulnerability of King Charles becomes a critical factor in the crisis. The logistics, security, and hosting costs for a gala of this magnitude could not be covered by private household funds. It required drawing directly from the sovereign grant, the taxpayer-funded pool of capital allocated for official state duties. King Charles is currently navigating a grueling schedule of cancer treatments. His physical and administrative energy is severely depleted. According to palace insiders, he is increasingly reliant on his wife to manage the operational aspects of the monarchy, and he is deeply averse to engaging in domestic conflict. When Camilla presented the gala as a necessary philanthropic triumph for the crown, Charles did not question the date. He simply wanted peace within his own household. He signed the authorization documents, releasing the sovereign grant funding, completely unaware that he had just authorized an action that would violate a legally binding treaty signed by his own mother. The palace courtiers and the modern generation of administrative staff operating out of Clarence House assumed that their plan was flawless. They operated under the arrogant assumption that the Spencer family was functionally powerless. They believed that Charles Spencer would be relegated to his estate at Althorpe, perhaps issuing a polite, mildly disappointed statement that the palace communications team could easily ignore. They believed that the passage of nearly 3 decades had dissolved any leverage the Spencers once held over the British monarchy. They were operating completely blind to the legal history of the institution they serve. To find the weapon that Charles Spencer used to completely annihilate Camilla's gala, we have to transition away from the modern palace and travel back to the first week of September in 1997. It was the most dangerous, destabilizing period the British monarchy had faced in the 20th century. In the days immediately following the car crash in Paris, the British public turned on the royal family with a level of ferocity and collective rage that genuinely threatened the survival of the institution. Queen Elizabeth II was marooned at Balmoral, facing a country that was demanding unprecedented accountability for the isolation and suffering Diana had endured during her time in the royal family. During that chaotic week, Charles Spencer emerged not just as a grieving brother, but as a formidable, highly articulate adversary who held the emotional loyalty of the entire nation. His eulogy at Westminster Abbey, where he publicly rebuked the royal family and pledged to protect William and Harry from the suffocating demands of the institution, was a defining moment of defiance. Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch possessing a razor-sharp understanding of constitutional survival, recognized that Charles Spencer held enough public leverage to cause permanent catastrophic damage to the line of succession. In the immediate aftermath of the funeral, before the media frenzy could settle, Queen Elizabeth initiated a highly classified private meeting with Charles Spencer. Working with her most trusted elite sovereign attorneys, she drafted a legally binding document designed to permanently pacify the Spencer family and ensure the unmolested transition of the crown to Prince William in the future. This document was officially titled the Memorial Sanctity Covenant. This was not a gentleman's agreement or a vague promise of goodwill. It was a heavily regulated statutory contract sealed under the High Court of Chancery. The core clause of the Memorial Sanctity Covenant was drafted with absolute unyielding precision. It explicitly prohibited the British Crown, the reigning monarch, and any working members of the royal family from utilizing the sovereign grant Crown estate properties or official state resources to host, fund, or participate in any events of a celebratory gala or dancing nature on the 31st of August. The covenant permanently legally classified the date as a day of protected solemn state reflection, completely immunizing the anniversary of Diana's death from ever being co-opted or overwritten by future royal celebrations. But a legal covenant is useless without a mechanism of enforcement, and the lawyers representing the Spencer family were brilliant enough to ensure that the Crown could never simply ignore the agreement in the future. They built a highly sophisticated, devastating poison pill into the contract. During the late 80s and early 90s, when Diana was navigating the most painful, isolating years of her marriage, she meticulously documented her experiences. She kept highly detailed handwritten journals recording the systemic psychological warfare, the covert media manipulation, and the coordinated social exclusion orchestrated by Camilla's network of allies within the aristocracy. This collection of private journals, documented evidence, and internal correspondence is known within the Spencer family trust as the Red Ledger. The poison pill clause in the 1997 Memorial Sanctity Covenant is absolute. It dictates that if the British Crown ever breaches the terms of the agreement and attempts to violate the sanctity of the 31st of August using state resources, the Spencer family is automatically legally released from all non-disclosure agreements regarding Diana's private papers. A breach of the covenant grants Charles Spencer the immediate, unchallengeable legal right to unseal the Red Ledger and publish the unfiltered, unredacted history of Camilla's historical abuses to the global press, without any fear of legal retaliation or defamation lawsuits from the palace. For 29 years, the Memorial Sanctity Covenant sat in the deepest, most secure archival vaults of the Privy Council. As the older generation of royal advisors retired or passed away, the institutional memory of the covenant faded. Queen Camilla's current roster of aggressive modern public relations Consultants and corporate lawyers had absolutely no idea that this document existed. They drafted their invitations, signed their catering contracts, and booked their global entertainment, completely unaware that by attempting to hijack the anniversary of Diana's death, they had just handed Charles Spencer the legal authorization to destroy the Queen Consort's entire reputation. The execution of Charles Spencer's retaliation did not play out in the gossip columns or the morning television broadcasts. It was delivered with the cold, silent, and absolute authority of the British judicial system. On a crisp Tuesday morning, just 2 weeks before the scheduled Global Humanitarian Gala, Queen Camilla was inside the heavily guarded private dressing rooms of Clarence House. She was surrounded by her personal stylists and the royal jewelers, conducting a final fitting for the bespoke couture gown she intended to wear on the 31st of August. Resting on the velvet dressing table before her was a staggering, multi-million-pound diamond and emerald collar necklace, carefully selected from the royal vaults to ensure her visual dominance in the global press photographs. The atmosphere in the room was one of supreme, untouchable confidence. Camilla believed she was standing on the absolute precipice of her ultimate public relations triumph, completely unaware that a legal missile was currently traveling through the streets of London, aimed directly at her operation. Simultaneously, a thoroughly unremarkable black sedan pulled up to the administrative gates of Buckingham Palace. A man stepped out carrying a standard leather briefcase. He was not a royal correspondent, he was not a wealthy philanthropic donor, and he was not a politician. He was a sworn bailiff acting on behalf of the High Court of Justice in London. He did not ask to speak to the palace press secretaries or the event planners. He presented his judicial credentials to the armed security detail and demanded to physically hand a sealed legal dossier directly to the king's private secretary. When the king's private secretary broke the seal on the dossier, the administrative machinery of Buckingham Palace ground to an immediate terrifying halt. Inside the envelope was an emergency High Court injunction. Attached to the injunction was a certified, heavily watermarked copy of the 1997 Memorial Sanctity Covenant, bearing the unmistakable signature of Queen Elizabeth II. Also included was a formal, legally binding declaration drafted by the elite estate solicitors representing Charles Spencer. The ultimatum presented in the dossier was not a negotiation. It was a total legal checkmate. Charles Spencer's lawyers informed the palace that by utilizing state resources to organize a celebratory gala on the 31st of August, the Crown was in direct actionable breach of the 1997 Sovereign Agreement. The High Court injunction demanded the immediate public and permanent cancellation of the Global Humanitarian Gala. The poison pill clause was laid out with brutal clarity. If the palace refused to cancel the event by 5 o'clock that evening, the Spencer family would legally execute their right to unseal the Red Ledger, the private, handwritten journals detailing the systemic psychological warfare and covert media manipulation orchestrated against Princess Diana by Camilla's faction in the early 1990s would be officially submitted into the public domain as part of a High Court evidentiary hearing. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the unredacted history of Camilla's abuses would be sitting on the editorial desks of every major newspaper on the planet, entirely protected by judicial privilege. The king's private secretary immediately initiated a code-red crisis protocol summoning the most senior Crown solicitors to an emergency briefing in the palace war room. When the legal advisors reviewed the documentation, absolute panic set in. They authenticated the signature of the late queen. They knew that the Memorial Sanctity Covenant was airtight. More importantly, the senior courtiers who had been working in the palace for decades knew that the red ledger was real. They knew exactly how damaging the contents of those journals were. If Charles Spencer was forced to publish Diana's unredacted accounts, the resulting global scandal would not just destroy Queen Camilla's reputation, it would trigger an extinction-level constitutional crisis for the reign of King Charles. The public outrage would be catastrophic, uncontrollable, and permanent. The Crown solicitors marched directly into the king's private study, bypassing all standard protocols. They interrupted. Charles placed the High Court injunction on his desk and informed him that the Global Humanitarian Gala had to be dismantled immediately. Queen Camilla was urgently summoned from Clarence House. When she arrived and was briefed on the situation, she descended into a state of absolute furious disbelief. She demanded that the Crown solicitors fight the injunction, arguing that the modern monarchy could not be held hostage by a 30-year-old document signed in the emotional aftermath of a car crash. She demanded that Charles use his sovereign immunity to force the gala to proceed. But the Crown solicitors delivered a cold, unforgiving dose of legal reality to the Queen consort. They explained that while the king possesses sovereign immunity, he does not possess the authority to overrule a high court injunction without triggering a constitutional meltdown, nor could he stop Charles Spencer from legally publishing the Red Ledger once the covenant was breached. They looked at King Charles and informed him that he had to choose between hosting a dinner party for his wife or saving the absolute survival of his monarchy. Charles, staring at the legal documents and fully comprehending the apocalyptic threat of Diana's private journals resurfacing, did not hesitate. He completely ignored his wife's demands. He looked at his private secretary and issued the order. The gala was to be cancelled immediately. The logistical nightmare that unfolded over the next 6 hours was the most humiliating administrative collapse the modern palace has ever endured. Because they were less than 2 weeks away from the event, the cancellation could not be executed quietly. The palace administration was forced to send out thousands of terse, highly awkward emergency communications to the global billionaires, Hollywood celebrities, and European heads of state, who had already arranged their private security and travel logistics to attend. The catering contracts, the floral arrangements, and the elite entertainment bookings were all abruptly voided, costing the palace hundreds of thousands of pounds in non-refundable deposits and cancellation fees. The press office was forced to release a deeply embarrassing, painfully vague public statement, citing unforeseen, unavoidable administrative and scheduling complications as the reason for the sudden cancellation of the royal family's most highly anticipated philanthropic event of the decade. They became the laughingstock of the global hospitality industry overnight. Queen Camilla was forced to swallow the bitter, humiliating reality that her crowning moment of public relations triumph, the night she was supposed to finally overwrite the memory of Princess Diana, had been completely annihilated by a piece of paper. She realized that she could wear the most expensive diamonds in the royal vault, but she could not defeat the legal architecture left behind by the woman she had spent her entire life trying to erase. Miles away from the suffocating chaos of London, the atmosphere at the Althorpe estate was perfectly still. As the sun began to set over the Northamptonshire countryside, Charles Spencer stood alone on the edge of the oval lake, looking out toward the small tree-lined island where his sister is buried. He did not invite any reporters to his home. He did not issue a triumphant statement to the press or post a vindictive message on social media. He did not need to speak a single word. Combined with the catastrophic collapse of Camilla's gala was the ultimate display of power. He had proven to the world and to the corridors of Buckingham Palace that the Spencer family will always be the most ruthless, uncompromising guardians of Diana's memory, and that they possess the legal firepower to bring the monarchy to its knees whenever necessary. But if Queen Camilla believes that the cancellation of her gala is the end of this nightmare, she is vastly underestimating the sheer danger of the document her actions just brought back into the light. Back in London, as the Crown solicitors were frantically archiving the High Court injunction and trying to mitigate the financial damage of the cancelled event, the lead constitutional attorney made a terrifying discovery. While reviewing the original certified copy of the 1997 Memorial Sanctity Covenant to ensure they were in full compliance, he turned to the second page of the document. The covenant did not just contain a single clause regarding the 31st of August. It contained a highly classified secondary addendum that had absolutely nothing to do with memorial dates or red ledgers. The second clause was a specific legally binding financial penalty regarding the Duchy of Cornwall. It stipulated that if the primary covenant was ever breached, or if the palace ever forced the Spencer family to invoke the High Court to protect Diana's memory, a dormant property transfer protocol would automatically activate. The clause grants Prince William, as the current Duke of Cornwall, the unilateral, unchallengeable legal right to immediately seize specific high-value agricultural and residential properties currently occupied and utilized by the Queen Consort's private family network. Prince William has known about this secondary clause for years. He has been sitting quietly in the background, fully aware of the financial landmine buried in his uncle's legal paperwork, just waiting for Camilla to make the exact arrogant mistake she made this week. By attempting to hijack the anniversary of Diana's death, Camilla didn't just cancel her own party. She legally unlocked the door for her stepson to systematically dismantle her family's real estate portfolio. And if you want to know exactly which luxury estates William is preparing to seize tomorrow morning, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the financial eviction of the Queen Consort's family is about to begin.